Today, we are going to make some grass. No, I'm not in Colorado, so it's not going to be that kind of grass. It's our techniques that are so simple and sensible, your mothers have practically built themselves. Ooh, wow. Ooh. Well, hello, folks. Welcome to today's show. It's Mad Dog Merv. Today, well, I was just reading some of the news headlines from some of the recent local news, and there's been an audit done for the Salt Lake City School District by, well, doesn't matter by who, but anyway, they have come to the conclusion that there's some schools that probably should be closed, that they're just not running at an efficient level. So I always hate to hear about the thought of closing a school, because I know, having been a head custodian of a couple of different schools, I know the impact the school has on the community, not just the people that go there, but as a whole. They're community gathering places. They're very special in the heritage that they hold. So today, we're going to actually look at one of the schools that I know has had low enrollment numbers for a very long time, but it sits on a site that has had schools there for, wow, almost, I don't know, 125 plus years. So it's a part of the city that has a lot of heritage when it comes to community for a school. And that's the old Webster School in Salt Lake City. Now, not the Webster that was in Magna. That's a whole different story, and that's a great story in and of itself. But this Webster was torn down at one point in time and rebuilt on the same site and renamed M.Lynn Bennion. So we know it now, and it's still open as the Bennion Elementary School. So we are going to take a look at that, a little bit of the history of that school today, and some pictures of the old Webster. So stick with Mad Dog Merv, and let's take a look at the old Webster and M.Lynn Bennion School.
In 1890, before Utah was even a state, there were a bunch of ward schools that consolidated, and a few other schools that consolidated into the Salt Lake City School District. One of those was the 10th Ward. 10th LDS Ward had a school building on the site of their church, their church building, and due to the fact that the increasing population of the area was growing, they decided to build a regular old school in 1897, and it was located on 429 South and 800 East in Salt Lake City. This building, which, as you can see here, it had 3 stories. It was a 34,718 square foot building, and it contained 18 classrooms. So for its day, it actually had quite a few classrooms. It was opened in January of 1898 at a cost of $54,373. The area of the grounds was a mere 1.81 acres. Wow, not much land at all. But as you can see from this Sanborn fire insurance map, that they didn't have a lot of space because there were so many homes around in that area. I love these old Sanborn maps. They are absolutely gold to have access to be able to see where the footprint of the original building was. After its opening, the school's population continued to increase until about 1920, when every available room, including the smaller resuscitation room and the library, had to be occupied to accommodate the 830 pupils then attending the school. Think about that for a minute. 830 kids in this 54,000 square foot, 18 room building. For several years before and after the peak of the school population in the district was reached, the boys of the upper grades, 5th to 8th inclusive, received instruction in manual training and shop work, and you can see the manual training building, which is an outbuilding here in this particular picture, while the girls of this same grade were instructed in domestic science, including cooking and sewing. Until the establishment of junior high schools in different sections of the city, children continued in the elementary school through the 8th grade, when they received certificates of graduation which admitted them into high school. This picture here is of the floor plan of the building. I happen to have access to some of those when I worked for the school district, and I came across this one. And it gives you a good idea where the staircases were located and the classrooms were located. Kind of a real neat piece to be able to see how this building was laid out. Now, in 1960, approximately 5,000 square foot addition was added to this building, which would have been like a gymnasium slash cafeteria, multi-purpose room, if you will, and some other smaller rooms. And the land was actually increased. Many of the lots in the area were purchased, and by this time in the 60s, the total footprint was 3.05 acres of land. Now you can see this picture here that was taken in the 1960s, so this is when it would have had that 3 acres of land. You can see these really neat old fire plugs, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in just a minute. But this is a great shot of the old Webster School, and you notice the flagpole is out in front of the school. And I'm not sure what years they started to do that, and they took them off the top of the building, so I'll have to research that someday. But you can see the rain gutters up on the roof and the down shoots for them. This is really kind of a fun picture to be able to look at and analyze. Now, shortly after this photo was taken, by 1965, the school's population had decreased. In this area of the city, people were moving to the suburbs, and the school population had decreased down to 397 students. And the aging building had been through several remodels during its lifespan. And it was concluded that they were going to probably need to replace this building. Now, in this particular shot of the Sanborn Fire Insurance map, you can see where those two fire plugs were located. They would be on the far left side, just below where the building is. You can see out in the street 2 little black dots, and that signifies the location of fire hydrants in the area. So that gives you some idea where that photo, that 1960s photo, was oriented. Really kind of, again, fun to be able to analyze and look at that. One thing about this drawing that you'll note is where the heating plant and the smokestack is in the very back of the building. Pretty neat. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at the old picture. This was taken in the early part of the 20th century. You will note that the flagpole is on the top of the building in this picture. It's kind of hard to see with these trees. Obviously, this was taken during the winter time. But you get a good view of where the mountains are, the homes that are next door. All of these things that you can kind of see in those fire insurance maps are here. Pretty neat old building. Well, again, by 1978, they needed to close this, demolish it, but they decided they were going to rebuild on the same site. Not exactly the same footprint and not exactly the same building. They weren't going to remodel the building, they were going to completely rebuild. So this was torn down, and they dug a new basement. They put in a new building, and it was named M.Lynn Bennion Elementary, and that is the same building that stands today there at that same address. So as you can see, education's been going on this spot since 1898. Pretty neat. pretty neat part of the heritage in this particular part of the city. Now, I was a supervisor over the custodial part of Bennion Elementary towards the end of my career, but I had actually worked there back in 1983. You see, during the playoffs between Christmas and New Year's, there was a fire. Somehow, some heat lamp had been left on for some critters that were in the library, and the cord overheated, causing a fire. And I remember when we went in there, after the fire was put out, it was our job to do some of the cleanup and get things ready so that they could have school the first part of January when the kids came back to school. Of course, they wouldn't be able to use the library, but it was the one part that was the most damaged by the fire. And I remember seeing the light fixtures, how they had melted and cascaded down to the carpet, and the areas where they had landed on the carpet were still the orange carpet underneath, but all the rest of the carpet was scorched and melted. It's a sight that I will never forget. Anyway, we went through the building, we removed a bunch of the smoke damage and cleaned things to the best of our ability so that they could be ready for school the very, like 2 weeks later. So that was an interesting experience in my career and a very interesting story that I have of the old, the M.Lynn Bennion School. Now, this building was built in such a way that it resembles an office building inside, and I think the school district had done that on purpose, knowing that with the low enrollment that someday they may have to sell this building or use it as some kind of a district office building. So it's kind of an interesting note that this is designed a whole lot different than pretty much any of the other school buildings that were designed in the Salt Lake City School District back in the 70s and early 80s. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this little history on the Webster School / Bennion School, and stay with us, and we'll have more echoes from the chalkboard another time. In the meantime, thanks for joining us.